There, that's better. Okay, so where was I? I was going to show off the repository that I built for this lecture. It looks like this. It's a store called Buy Our Stuff, and it's got a bunch of products for sale. The images all came from Unsplash. The product data all came from Faker, and Faker generated the names of the products as well as the descriptions. And then I tried to use the names to search for the products on Unsplash, and it sort of got. I mean, that is marble. It's not a watch. That is a bag. It's not copper. So I mean, in many cases, it got one of the things, one of the terms correct. And so there's a few routes already available. I've got zoomed in a little bit there. A few routes already available here. One is this home page, which is going to a products controller, and it's the index. And then if I click on a given link, that takes us to the show page, which is just using the same partial that I use on the index page. And that's just to give us multiple pages to work with. There's no back button or home button as of yet. We're gonna add that. I can click back just to get back to the home page, but we're gonna add a little menu up here. We're gonna put a logo up top here, and we're gonna put a shopping cart up on the right hand side here. And we're gonna add some buttons to each one of these products to allow us to add them to the cart. And then when we click on any of those buttons, it will add the product to the cart. We'll see a cart change. We can sort of remove items from the cart, either from the cart directly or from the little cards themselves. The button that previously said add to cart will say something like remove from cart. And so that's the plan for today. That's what we're hoping to do. I'm going to just quickly go over some of this source code with you, just so we have a good understanding of what we're starting with. And I also want to make a little branch. And so I'm going to do a git checkout -b for make me a branch. And I'm going to say shopping cart, and then what section are you guys? You're like section something. You're section 203660, and hit that. Let's proceed here and take a look at how this application is built. I wanted to keep things fairly simple in terms of the markup, and so I'm not using Bulma for this project. I'm just using that MVP CSS that we saw when we were playing around with React. And so the way that MVP CSS works is that it just provides a bunch of styling for HTML elements. And so this page itself is already styled with MVP CSS, and I wanted some cards like this. And so I just sort of went and peeked behind the scenes to see how these cards were built. And they were built as a section, and inside of this section, aside elements, and inside of the aside elements, images, H3s, and paragraph tags. And so over here, over in my project, if we look at the application layout, so this is in the app views layouts folder, I have included the MVP CSS as just a hard-coded link right in there. So that's pulling it from Unpackage. Unpackage.com is a content delivery network that is specifically for allowing you to bring in things without having to download them. So, this is just one of the various things that are available at Unpackage.com. And then inside of this layout here, you can see I've got a header. The header has an H1 and an H3 in it. I've got a main, and that's where my views are being yielded into, and I've got a footer. We're going to come and do a little bit of work in here later, That's why I'm going to leave this file open. But that's the gist of how I got the MVP CSS in. I also made a few little tweaks to the CSS. So if you were to look in your app asset style sheet folder and you looked at the file called application CSS, you would see that I made a few little tweaks to things like how the footer laid things out, how the default form is sort of laid out in terms of some margins, and also how sort of like nested lists within lists that have links inside of them, how they are displayed. So that was just a few little tweaks, and I've already set that up. If you clone the repo, you'll already have those tweaks in place inside of your application CSS. So, and also just to note about that, if you want to add just regular CSS to a Rails project and have it be sort of affect all of your files, you put it into this application.css. You can also, if you want to make use of what's called SCSS or Sass, then you can put any number of SCSS files into this folder and put the Sass code into there. And I don't cover Sass specifically in this course, but there are some marks for if you want to go and discover what Sass is all about. There are some marks for styling your project using Sass. Okay, so that's get that out of the way. If we look at the routing file here, we can see there's a few routes in place. I've used the resources command to make a index and a show route for products. And I also made it so that the root route is going to the products controllers index. And so that means that this is the products controllers index, but also if I went to just /products, it would be the same thing. We'll come back to this routing file, so I'll leave it over here. In the products controller, very standard index and show, loading all products or loading one product, nothing surprising there. Inside of the show and index views, the views that are associated with those two actions, they are simply rendering a product or a set of products into a section tag by way of a partial. And so it's the partial we're going to take a closer look at. Before I look at the partial, I'm also going to quickly show you the database schema, because that'll sort of go hand in hand with what a product is all about. And so I'm going to close I'm just going to close all of these so I can open them again. Okay, so here is the schema and the seed file. Active Storage was installed so I could get some images involved, but the real root of things is that I've got a products table, and a product has a name, a price in a whole number of cents, and a description. I have put the price as a whole number of cents just because that's how I typically deal with dollar amounts in a database, and it will make working with Stripe a little bit easier when we get to that point in the course. If you've already got your application running and you put decimal for your price, that's totally fine. It's just that the Stripe API expects money to be provided in a whole number of cents. And so if you had a product, for example, that was like $5.35 in the database, and according to Stripe, it's going to be represented as $5.35. And so that's just a little tweak that I made, knowing that Stripe was on the horizon. And that is done because money is not a floating point value. Floating points are approximations, and they can be, according to the computer, close enough. But money, it's not good for it to be just close enough. Money has especially in sort of customer business transactions, money has a set value, and we don't want it to be just an approximation. So we store it as a whole number of cents. And in regular everyday business to consumer transactions, we don't ever worry about things like fractional cents. And so having a whole number of cents in the database is a nice way of storing your dollar amounts. And so that's the schema. close that. Oh, closed two things by accident there. And then this is the seed script. Here I am using Faker to generate my unique products, some randomized pricing, descriptions, and then pulling those images from Unsplash based on the product name and attaching them to the product itself. I also went and I installed inside of my WSL ImageMagick. So I did a sudo apt install ImageMagick with a K at the end of it, and that is a command line image manipulation tool. And then inside of my gem file, along with Faker, I put in the image processing gem, and we're going to see in a moment inside of my partial that I am having the images resized on the server side to keep them lightweight for the users that are using this platform. And so, without further ado, here I am for the product. If the product image is present, I'm using image tag to display not just the product image, but look, I'm going here and I'm saying variant, resize to limit, and then dot processed. And so resize to limit is going to, I think it preserves the aspect ratio, and then the larger of the two sides, whether it's the larger being the height or the width, it's going to apply one or the other to the resize. And then the dot processed, without that in place, it will resize every time anyone visits this website again and again and again. But if you have dot process, it'll cache the resized file to the file system, or if you're using a cloud storage, to the cloud storage, and so that it doesn't have to continually resize those images for every individual who's visiting the website. And beyond that, we are displaying a link to, using the product name, a link to the show page. We're displaying the price. I'm using the number to currency helper to display the number as a nice little currency, and I have to divide it by 100 before I display it because it's a whole number of cents, and humans are not used to seeing prices in that format. And the number to currency helper helps there as well, because if the price ended up being something like, let's say the price was 500 and yeah, 550. And so if you divide that by 100, you would get like 5.5. But what you really want to display is $5.50, right? Again, we as humans are not used to seeing 0.5 to mean 50 cents. We're used to seeing a dollar sign in front and a padded zero at the end. And so number to currency will put those padded zeros in place if they're needed. If they aren't, if the price was like that, well then it wouldn't need to pad the zero because there'd already be some value in that position. And then beyond that, we're displaying the description. So that's the high level overview of this particular project. Where am I at here? Oh yeah, I want to make a shopping cart, and I want to make a simple one. So one of the things that that I tend to tell students with this project is that I tried to make the project sort of as realistic as possible in terms of like creating an e-commerce store, but really the truth of the matter is that we are making like a pretend e-commerce store, right? There's a lot of simplifications in place that would make it so that this is not a fully featured, everything you would want in an e-commerce store kind of implementation, because that would just, the scope of the project would just be too large. The scope of the project is already very large, so it doesn't need to be any larger. And so one of the places where I thought that we could simplify things would be to allow us to have a shopping cart that wasn't persisted to the database, but that was simply persisted in session. And one of the downsides of that is that When you only persist a session, then the shopping cart basically lives with a particular browser. And if you were to go to a different device, so if you pulled out your mobile phone and you went back to the same website, you're not going to have your shopping cart translate over to that other device. If you really wanted that kind of behavior, then you would need to have like a cart items model and a cart item model and a cart items table into which that you actually persisted items, and you would need a full user system for signups and logins, and then you would have to have the ability to associate those cart items with a user so that when the user logged in on a different device, you could show them what was in their cart. So I wanted you to be able to make this e-commerce store with user logins being optional. And so there are marks for implementing user logins, but you don't need to. You can get all of the marks associated with checkout and Stripe without having logins. You can just have them go through a checkout flow, ask them for their name and address right before you check them out, use that address to calculate their taxes, and then send them off to Stripe. And then you don't need any kind of login system, but you can have one. And then that also simplifies the session as well, because you don't necessarily need to have it associated with a particular user. Right on, we're going to implement some shopping cart functionality. And so for that reason, we need the money sound effect. Where's my sound effects? Oh, no sound effects? How can I get started without sound effects? Okay, give me a moment. This is crucial. I cannot actually have a class. Oh no. And I'm recording it all without being on the right output and everything. Okay, well, let's see if I can switch this now. Crickets all around. Is that what you're saying? Here we are. Here's some money sounds. Now we are good to go. That was very important. Okay, so before we implement the shopping cart, we're just gonna do like the hello world of Session. We're gonna sort of see what it's like to use Session in Rails. It's rather similar to using Session in PHP. If you think back to PHP, we had like our super global, the $_session super global. The way it worked with PHP is that when Session was instantiated, PHP sent the user's browser a cookie that would uniquely identify that user, but all of the session information was actually stored in a file on the server. With Rails, when we invoke Session, a cookie is still sent to the user's browser, but all of the session information is also stored in that cookie as well. So nothing is actually stored on the server side when it comes to Session. So let's see what I mean by that. Let's pull up my project right here, and let's do what I tend to consider that the hello world of Session is a visit counter. And so I want to make it on the index page. Here on the index page, I would like to make it so that I can have a little message that says, you have visited this page n times, where n is going to start at 1 and go up and up and up every time the user refreshes that page. So that's going to be our hello world of Session. And so I am working with the index page, so I'm going to initially do my work with the index action. And so in the index action, I'm going to make a visit count available that I will initially set to 0. So I made an @visit count. That making it an @ sign is going to make it available inside of here. And I can just say visit count. And I know that this is a number, and I know this number is going to affect the grammar of this word times here. So we'll say 0 times, 1 time, 2 times. And so there's that special case for 1. And so I can make use of Rails's pluralization helper. I can say pluralize visit count with the word time. And if I go to my application and reload it, that looks awful. Let's put this paragraph outside of that section. That looks better. And it says you have visited this page 0 times. If I hard code visit count to 1 and I come back here, it says you have visited this page 1 time. So that's nice. I've got the pluralization is dealt with by using the pluralize helper, which is something that we run into all the time as programmers. But really what I want to do here is I want to have this visit count actually plucked out of session at some position. And we'll just say that, you know, I'm going to, in session, use the key visit count as a symbol. That's not a special set of words or anything. It doesn't have to match these words here. It's just what I'm calling the place in the session hash that I want to store the visit count. And I want to make it so that every time the user comes to this website, that the visit count is incremented by 1. And we don't have a plus plus in Ruby. We can just use the plus equals operator to add 1 to visit count. And so we don't have to, like we did in PHP, we had to sort of start session. We would sort of run that session start, or I think that's what it was called, just sort of bring session into existence. With Rails, session is always there, and we just use the special session hash and we store values into it. And so now visit count plus 1. Now, if I was to go to my website right now, there would be a crash. And we're going to see why. If I reload this page. Oh, there's not a crash because I have like a cookie left over from the last time I did this with the other class. But this is a good time to show you where Rails stores its cookies and how to delete them to get yourself back to sort of a clean slate. And so this is different for Firefox and Chrome. But in Firefox, I hit Control-Shift-I, I go to Storage, and I go to Cookies, and I see my local host, and there is the cookie. And so I'm going to delete that. In Chrome, it's very similar, but if I go to Control-Shift-I, and I go to Application, and then Cookies, you'll see your cookies. You won't have any probably yet. You might, but then you could delete it. The other way you can sort of get cookies under control with either browser is to use a privacy tab, which has a separate cookie store, which is disposable, and that would sort of reset your cookies. So now that I've removed that cookie, I'll leave this sort of like that. Now we should see what I was thinking would happen, which is this crash right here. And the crash is saying undefined method plus for the nil class. And that's happening on this line. And the reason this is a problem is that the very first time the user visits our site, or the very first time any user visits our site, there will be nothing in that session at position visit count. It'll be nil. And so we need to give it a default value. And handily, Rails has a default value operator, which is the or equals operator. And this works in JavaScript as well. The default value operator of or equals is also a JavaScript thing, and it allows us to set a default value when the thing on the left-hand side is unset. And so when this is nil, it will be assigned 0. But once this has a value that isn't nil, then this will not assign it 0. So it's not going to overwrite it once there's, you know, the number 10 in there or the number 20 in there, but when it's nil, it will give it a default value of 0. So this is going to say like defaults the count to 0 when it's nil. And now my system should work. You have visited this page 1 time. Reload. Oh, look, I visited this page 2 times. Reload again. I've now visited this page 3 times, etc., etc. I could open up a different tab in the same browser, and I could, increase this count a few times to, like, say 8. I could go back to my original tab and I could reload it and it will get to 9. And so the session is global to all of the tabs for this particular browser, but not to the privacy tabs. And so if I went and opened a new private window and pasted in my page, you can see it's out back to 1. I can, increase it a bunch of times. Oops, don't open more, just keep increasing here. Get it up to 16. Go back over here. If I reload this, it's not going to have anything to do with that 16. It's just going to go to 10. And of course, if I went to a completely different browser, there would be a completely different cookie storage. So if I went to Chrome or if I went to Edge, they would all start at 1 and go up from there. So it's unique to a particular browser, but global to all the tabs of that browser, except for privacy tabs. And if we look here, you always know the name that Rails uses is the name of the project. So when I did a Rails new, I called it shopping for stuff, and that's what's in there. Starts with an underscore, shopping for stuff, and then adds underscore session. And so that's always the name of the session cookie. And then if you look at the value, in fact, we can look at it here. Here's the value that's inside of session stuff. It's an array, and it's effectively unreadable. And that is on purpose. Even though all of the session information is stored on the client, the Rails core team didn't want you to be able to go in and manipulate that data because you could potentially game the system in some respects. Maybe there's something being stored in session that you shouldn't be able to manipulate yourself as the end user. And so the data is stored in a encrypted, cryptographically signed manner so that it's tamper-proof. If I was to go in and change the value of the session data, it would invalidate the session and Rails would reissue a new session to me. So you can't, from the client side, mess with any of that session data. And that's really all there is to using session. Right now, this only works on my single page. If I wanted this to be sort of global to my entire website, I could refactor this slightly. And this will come in handy for our shopping cart because we probably want our shopping cart to appear on every single page. We don't want the cart just to only be loaded on the home page. So let's take a look at how I might make this visit count a little bit more global to my application. I mean, at this point, I only have 2 separate pages, 2 separate routes in my application, but that's okay. I'm going to go to the controllers folder and I'm going to open up the application controller. And remember, every controller inherits from application controller. It's a place where I can put stuff that will be inherited by all controllers. And so I'm going to make a few private methods inside of the application controller here. And then we're going to see that I can sort of bake some functionality into every single action across all of the controllers of my application, even though at this point we just have 1. So I'm going to make a, got rid of the private there. I'm going to make a method called initialize session. And I'm also going to make a method called visit count. Yeah. And I want this will return the visit count from session. And this will initialize the visit count to 0 for new users. Oh, and I need one more. Increment visit count. And this, unsurprisingly, will increment the user's visit count in session. And I'm just going to go in, and we already have all of this functionality created. I just need to copy and paste from my products controller. So line 5 here, which does the incrementing, or sorry, which does the initializing. I'm going to go paste that here. I got my session visit count. The incrementation step here on line 5, I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it into my increment visit count right here. And then in visit count here, I'm going to take this line and I'm going to simplify it just down to returning the session at position visit count. Just putting all of this stuff there, that is that's not going to be enough to get things going. Really what I want is I want initialize session count and increment visit count. Initialize session and increment visit count. I want those to execute every single time a user visits a particular action. And there is a way of hooking into Rails's lifecycle for controllers that will allow us to do things like that. I can say before any given action, I want to run initialize session, and then after that I want to run increment visit count. So now before every action, these two things will execute. That's good. And then this visit count, I want to make this visit count available to any particular view. And we can do that by turning visit count into a helper method. So we've used a bunch of helper methods at this point in the course, things like the link to command or the form with command. Those are all Rails view helpers. I can turn this into a helper by saying helper method visit count. And so now over here inside of my index, instead of just saying at visit count, there's no longer an at visit count. I can just say visit count, and this is actually the method now. This is going to call my helper method here, which will then return the session at visit count. It's super handy to go into the application controller and make helper methods. One of the things all of you might like to do when you're implementing, say, the search functionality for the e-commerce store needs to have a little drop down that shows all of your categories, and then the user can pick which category they want to search within. Well, that means that you need to have categories exposed to every single one of your pages, because you probably want that search form to appear maybe at the top of all pages. And so you could do something like helper method product categories. I wouldn't just call it categories. I think that would get you in trouble by being sort of maybe too close to a naming convention for the table. And then you could have a method called product categories, and then you could just have it return like category.all or something along those lines. And then in any one of your views or inside of your application layout, you could just call product categories and it would always return to you category all. So that's a handy way of using this application controller to make either things that are executing before every action or things that you need available inside of all of your views. Now I don't have categories, so I'm going to remove that. And then one of the students in the other section just commented like, couldn't this get out of hand? And the answer is yes. This can absolutely get out of hand. and you could end up with an application controller which is very long and sort of sprawling, and so you do want to watch for that. If it's a bunch of very short, well-named methods, I don't think it's a big deal. If you end up seeing a lot of logic in here, then that probably needs to be extracted out into maybe some work with, the model or something like that. Kiara's saying, do we have to have individual lines like that? I don't know if I can do a comma. I've never. We can experiment like that and see if we can have both of them trigger. So I don't know the answer to that question, but we'll soon see. Let's go back over here and make sure this is still working. I haven't broken anything. So it's still working. If I go over here and I say like before action and increment the visit count. Oh yeah, looking good. Yeah, that works too. That's pretty cool. So there you go. We definitely can do that. Any questions at this point? Oh, I can even look before I say any questions. I can even now take this. You've visited this page n times, and I can move it into the layout. Right? I'll put it in the header here, and now it'll be on every page. Right? So I can go here and see it. It's up there now, but I can go to any one of these products and see it. So we're at 19 times. And when I visit the copper bag, it's now 20 times. It should probably be like you visited this site 20 times or something along those lines. But now I can go increase it a number of times here, and then I could go, back to the root, and it continues to increase here as well. So that's just to show that now I've sort of made it global to the site. And yes, Ian, I do remember that the beautiful, it used to be that every single web page on the internet had a beautiful little visit counter at the bottom of the page. And those were the days. Those were the days. But they weren't individual to the particular user visiting the site. They were more global, as in like how many people had gone to your particular web page, and they usually were very close to an animated GIF of somebody working in a construction hat. Yeah, visit count, all of that, and I'm just going to delete all this code. I just wanted it for demonstration purposes, but I'm going to delete it all. So I'm deleting the line that I put into the application layout. I'm going into my application controller. I'm going to leave the before action for initialize session because we're going to need that, but I'm going to blow everything else away. All of this can go. I don't need that anymore. And this is going to be, this will be where we initialize our shopping cart. And let's do that right now. Let's initialize the shopping cart, session, apposition, shopping cart. We're going to use our default assignment operator, and we're going to model our shopping cart as an array. And it's going to be an array of product IDs. The shopping cart will be an array of product IDs. And so it's going to start off as an empty array or an empty shopping cart. And we are eventually going to add to it so that when we want to buy a particular product, it's going to take that product's ID and it's going to push it into this array. And if we want to remove a particular product from our shopping cart, well, we can delete that ID from that shopping cart array as well. While we're in here, we might as well make a helper method that is called, let's just call it cart. And what cart's going to do, it's not going to create active storage tables. It's going to go to the product model and find all of the products in my shopping cart. In the past, when we've used find, we've passed it a single value, right? If we look at our show action, find gets a single ID from the params hash, and it gives us back a single product. But the other thing that find can do is you can pass find an array of IDs, and it'll give you back a collection of products. So what this is doing here is going to return a collection of product objects based on the product IDs in the shopping cart. So those are some nice little helpers. This initialize session will make it so that the session is always there and always starts as an empty array. And we now have a helper method available inside of all of our views, which will go to our product model and find all of the products based on their IDs. And so that is lovely. So this application controller, it's effectively done. This is all we need here. We've got our helper method in place to be able to fetch the cart when we need it. We've got this before action hook in place to initialize the card when we need it. What we now need is a new controller. And so I'm going to create a cart controller. And so the cart controller is going to be created like this. I'm going to say Rails generate a controller called cart. And I'm not going to worry so much about conventions, like normally our controllers are pluralized, and we normally pluralize our controllers when they are being paired with a particular active record model, and then we name the controller after, you know, the database table. In this case, the cart controller, there's going to be no backing model. So I can sort of break out of conventions a little bit, live dangerously outside of Rails conventions, and just create a controller called cart. And so that will execute, and it will make for me a cart controller, which I can control click to open up in my editor here. And one of the things that tends to be done in the Rails community is that we start to think of everything according to the 7 RESTful routes, right? So when we are working with something like a products controller, index and show are 2 of the 7 RESTful routes. There's also like the new create pair for creating new things, and the edit update pair for updating things, and then the destroy for deleting something. And Rails programmers tend to sort of try to model their entire application around those 7 RESTful routes. And so I'm going to try to model this cart controller in the 7 RESTful routes kind of way as well. So how am I going to sort of structure a cart according to the sort of RESTful conventions? Well, just like something in a database could have sort of CRUD applied to it, it could be created and read and updated and deleted. Items could, or our shopping cart, and items could be sort of added by creating new cart items, and could be deleted by deleting items from the cart. And so I'm going to create a method in here called create, which is create, which is one of the 7 RESTful words that Rails leans on. And I'm going to make another one called destroy, which is another one of the 7. And the way that create works in the conventions of Rails is it'll be assigned a particular path, and it will be triggered on a post, and it will expect form data to be posted to it. And so the /cart route, if we post to it, it's going to expect there to be some data in the data sent as form data, and that's going to end up in the params hash. And I'll just say here, add items. add item to cart. And then the way in Rails conventions that the destroy is normally triggered is by sending a delete request to /controller/some ID, because the destroy action is a member action. And so in this case, the data is sort of part of the URL. This is the particular, this is going to be the product item. And so this, and then here we're going to remove param from the cart. And this is going to add params ID to the cart. So even though in one case the ID is coming to us by way of the URL, and in the other case the data is coming to us by way of the form, the params hash is serving dual purpose. It gets form data and it gets parameters from the URL. And so in both cases, we're going to be dealing with something that's just at params at position ID. And we're either adding params at position ID to the cart, or we're removing whatever's being sent to us, whatever ID is being sent to us from the cart. And so that's the goal of these two actions. And I need routes to exist for those actions. So in my routing file, I will say resources, spell that correctly, resources for my cart controller, but I only need a create and a destroy. And so only points to an array of symbols where I have create and destroy, and Rubocop is going to rewrite this as it will into a %i space delimited array, which just means an array of symbols. So I don't like that rewrite that Rubocop does, but I haven't tweaked my config file to fix it. Nonetheless, that's what that means. It's absolutely equivalent to an array with a create symbol in it, a comma, and a destroy symbol, but it just gets rewritten like so. And just to make sure that those get created as I'm expecting, I go back to the cart controller here, but I also bring up my browser. If I go to /rails/info, I get to see my routes, make them a little bit bigger maybe. And you can see we have two routes being created that are associated with the cart. One of them is going to respond to a post request to /cart, and that will trigger the create action. And that's just what we said we wanted, a post request to /cart, and then retrieve some form data. And then the other of the two actions is going to respond to a delete request to /cart/ID, and that will trigger the destroy action. And that's happening here. And so we can now go and implement these things. We're going to need a button for both of them, a little form for this one, and just a button for this one to send that information to us. And then we can actually implement the body of those actions as well. So we'll start by making a form for this create action, and we want one for every one of our products. So we're going to put it into our partial, and we're just going to put it at the bottom of the partial. And so I'm going to, at the bottom of this partial, inside the aside, because that's our item that does the sort of card, I'm going to say form with, that's my helper that builds forms, and I want this form to post to the cart index path. That's this little URL helper right here, which will trigger this route. So as long as I do a post to the cart index path, which is really just /cart, will trigger the create action. So I'll say form with URL cart index path do, and then I can have an and associated with that. And then I'll put a button in here. I'll say button tag add to cart. And if I go back over here and I reload the old page, look at that. Look at that button. It's big, it's blue, it says add to cart on it, and it even turns a lighter shade of blue when I hover it. I'm happy. Yet it isn't sending any data, right? If we were just to view source here, we would see a form for each one of those. The form has a hidden input that's sending Rails' standard authenticity token. But we also want to send the ID of the product. Which product do we want to add to cart? And so we're going to do that with a hidden input. And there's a helper for that, a hidden field tag helper. And so I'll say hidden field tag. I want this thing to be known as ID inside of my params hash. That's what I said that I wanted here inside of my controller actions. So I name it ID here. And then the value that I actually want to submit is the product ID. And so with that in place, if I go back and reload my view source here, we can see for every one of the forms that are in our generated source code, we now have an input of type hidden, where the name and ID is set to ID, and the value is the primary key of whatever product we're on. So this one's 24, this one here is 25, this one here is 26. So the first three products in our system are 24, 25, and 26 for their primary keys. And just so that we know that that data is sort of being successfully added to our, or successfully received by our action here, I can use something I haven't used before, which is the logger. The logger lets me write to the server logs, right? Normally you get a bunch of stuff in the server logs that's generated by Rails itself, but I can also in the server logs type stuff in myself. So I could say adding params apposition ID to the cart. And so if everything works well, I should be able to click that button, this button right here, have the ID submitted as a hidden input to the cart index path by way of a post. The default for form width is a post, but I could be more explicit. I could say like method here is post if I wanted to be explicit about it. That would be fine. And so we're going to post the ID. It's going to be received over here, and we should see it logged out to this window down below. So if I go here to my shopping for stuff, and I'm going to buy product number 2 here, some mediocre wooden gloves. It's time to bring the mediocre, and I'll click that button. This was product, I think, 25. And look at that. It says adding 25 to the cart. Neat. Okay, so that's just testing purposes. I wanted to make sure you know me, I always don't trust myself. I want to make sure that I've wired things up correctly. So I do a little test, feel good about myself, wipe the sweat off my brow, and continue on. And so to continue on now would be to add the value to the shopping cart. The other thing though that I want you to notice is anytime you have submitted anything to the Rails server, you can get a lot of information from what's in the server logs. So here we could see that, like, what the request type was. It was a post. It went to /cart. What controller action was triggered, and then what parameters were sent. So there's that authenticity token. Here's the ID. But the thing I want you to notice about the ID is that it was sent as a string. The 25 has like quotes around it. And that's just because the web is built out of strings, right? Every form, even if you put a number into a form input, it's still going to be sent across the web as a string. And so when we receive this information here in create, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert it to an integer. So I'm going to say, I'm going to overwrite my logger there. I'm just going to say ID equals params ID dot to I. So turn that string identifier into a numeric identifier. Then add it to the shopping cart. And then normally at the end of any controller action, we are going to be automatically rendering the associated view. But there's no view here. I really just want to send the user right back to where they were, which was like the root, and let them see that their shopping cart has got a new item in it. And so I'm going to say redirect to the root path. And again, for debugging purposes, I'm going to go into my application layout, and inside of the header, I'm going to say debug cart. Debug is like print R from the PHP world. It just makes like a nice human readable version of the thing. Did I do something wrong, Brody? Oh yeah, I absolutely did do something wrong. Thank you. We actually have to put the ID. Yeah, that's the most important part. Put that ID into the shopping cart. Don't just like mention the cart. Oh, cart, do your thing. No, yes, you're right. We have to be very. It's not that magical. So yeah, we're gonna push the ID into the session cart, and then over here, I'm gonna debug the cart. This cart here is that helper that I set up in my application controller. That's this thing. So let's see if this works. Back here, reload this page. Currently, there's nothing displaying in the cart there. I'm going to buy my mediocre wooden gloves. Click that button. Oh, undefined method nil for cart. What did I not call it? Cart? Oh, I called it shopping cart. Seems a little wordy, Kyle. But okay. I mean, that's fine. I can be okay with that. Let's call it shopping cart here as well. Shopping cart. Reload. Purchase the mediocre wooden gloves. Boom! Look at that. So it's not super helpful to have all this information here, but at least we can see, yes, we have, you know, product 25, which is the mediocre wooden gloves. It might even be a little bit nicer in the application here to just be debugging the session apposition shopping cart. That will be a little less overwhelming. So debugging session apposition shopping cart will just show us the number 25. If I then want to buy some small aluminum pants, those are product ID number 24. And so I click that. Oh, look at that, 24. I want to buy this sleek wavy keyboard, and I click that button, 29. So that is working. There's one thing that is yet, there is a problem, which is like if I click again for small aluminum pants, 24 is now in there twice. That I'm not gonna, for this implementation of the shopping cart, I'm gonna stop at just getting everything into the cart once. I'm gonna leave it up to you all. If you want to on your project, you can implement quantities for the cart, but I'm gonna put a little blocker in place here in my cart controller saying like only add to the shopping cart or add to the shopping cart unless the session shopping cart includes that ID already. There we are. And so now, although it won't remove the 24 from it, it won't allow another 24 in there. So if I click this again, we still have the two 24s. If I click this 25, we don't get a 25. But if I click 26 here, we do. That's lovely. We might even want like a little bit of extra information around that. We might even want to make a flash message. I could make a flash notice message saying like item added to cart. And I can make this flash message display maybe at the top of my page here, or maybe right here. I could just say if flash notice. And what flash is, it's like session, but it's like a single use session. So you can put something into the flash and it'll show up for one redirect and then it'll disappear. And so here I can say flash notice. And so with that in place, if I go and add a product to my shopping cart, like the sleek aluminum bench here, I get this little message, item added to cart. I don't like that it's tied over on that side there. It probably should be inside of the main, like that. Notice if I just reload the page though, that message goes away. It exists for a very short amount of time. It's a flash notice. And I should probably only be setting it if I actually add an item to the cart. And so I can take all of this here. If I take this unless, I don't usually like to use unless as something other than a trailing modifier. I find it makes things a little bit harder to read, but I guess I'll do it now. It's probably better than a not in there. So now that flash message will only be set if we actually have added an item to the cart. And so if I go way down here and I purchase this aerodynamic steel hat, it says item added to the cart. If I try to add something that's already in the cart, and I could even put a flash message saying items already in the cart or something along those lines. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty there, but we can use the flash for those kind of messages where on redirect, you want to let the user know something. And so again, you just set the flash notice, and then in the application layout here, I just say if there is a flash notice, then display it. Does MVP CSS, does it have some kind of nice default styling? Maybe that's a bit too yellow for me. Is there something I could use to display it nicely here? Maybe not. Yeah, doesn't look like there's just a nice thing that I could use. That's okay. I won't get hung up on that right now. Adding to cart works. What about removing from the cart? Wouldn't that be nice? And then also we'll make the cart look a little bit better than this debug session. But let's try to remove items from the cart. So we're gonna need to implement this destroy method. But inside of our partial, we sort of want to do one thing or the other. So like here, I could say like if the cart includes the current product, because cart is an array of products, so I can ask if it includes the current product. Well, if it includes the current product, then I want to provide like a remove button. Otherwise, I will show the add button. And here, just temporarily, I'll just say remove from cart. Not a button yet, but we'll just put that there so that we can see if it works over here. So there's the logic of it. Remove from cart, remove from cart, remove from cart. Practical Marble Shoes still says add to cart. If I click it, it now says remove from cart. So that's good. when I was talking about implementing this destroy action, I said we should be triggering a delete, an HTTP delete to /cart/some ID, where that ID is the current product. I don't need a whole form here. Rails gives me the ability to make a little button with button to. And I can have that button to send a request to a particular path. And so if I go back to /rails/info, we can remember that this delete request here has a helper associated with it called cart path. And it's going to build that URL for me. And if I give cart path something that has an ID, it'll even put the ID in. So I can say button to cart path for the product. And not only should this be a button that sends its data to the cart path, I want this to be triggering a delete. And then I'll say do, and then I'll say end, and I'll remove the paragraph tag in here. And then whatever goes in the middle is what the text of my button is going to be. So button to cart path, that's going to be /cart/whatever IDs in this product. When I click that button, it's going to send a delete request, an HTTP delete request to that particular path. And then I can go and implement that right here. And implementing that is not too tricky. Step one is going to be the same as step one with the create path, which is just like take the sent param and turn it into an integer, and then just go to the cart and delete that ID. And delete is just a method that exists on arrays. Oh, thank you, Braden. There we go, shopping cart. Wouldn't it be great that like whenever I was coding, there were always just people watching and helping me fix my mistakes? I think that would be like the best thing. Maybe I should just always code on Twitch, and then I could just have people that would help me whenever I made a mistake. That would be lovely. Redirect to root path. Oh, Brody's saying we define the cart method. That cart method is defined in the application controller. That's this thing. That's this thing right here. So yours is not working. Brody, do you have it defined in your application controller as a helper method? Do you have helper method cart in there? And then cart, which returns product find for that shopping cart. There it is. Yeah, so it wasn't defined as the helper method. And then I could even use the flash notice again here. And I could say item removed from cart. And if we wanted to, I mean, we could even be fancy and we could load that item up from Active Record, and we could say even what was added or what was removed from the cart, right? We could say product equals product.find ID. We could grab that in both places, and then we could say you know, product.name added to the cart, and product.name removed from the cart. Yeah, that seems like a thing that we could do. And now if I go over here, let's see if we have any debugging to do. Look at these remove from cart buttons. I no longer want to buy these small aluminum pants. Those will not completely go away because they're in there twice, so I'll have to click the button twice. But that's a glitch from before. So I click that once, small aluminum pants removed from the cart. Oh good, it removes all of them. So I guess delete just finds like every instance of that thing and deletes it. That's good. So now that's back to an add to cart. Oh no, I've changed my mind. I want to buy those small aluminum pants. Small aluminum pants added to the cart. No, I don't want those small aluminum pants anymore. Who wants aluminum pants anyways? Nobody. And then I remove it from the cart, and I could go and I could start removing other things. I think the add and remove could use some emojis. We'll just make them tasteful emojis though, if there's such a thing. Remove from cart, I'll put like a little red X. And add to cart, I'll put a plus in there. That's nice. Look at that. Pretty, 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 pretty. Add to cart. Changed my mind on the small aluminum pants again. And then look at that nice red X. No, I'm going to remove from the cart. Any questions? We're not quite done, but we're getting close. Any questions, or do you need to see any bit of my code? Do you need to maybe see the cart controller here? Do you need to see something else? I like to have maybe I like to group the flash notice separately. I still want to do one final thing, which is like nicely display a shopping cart so we can actually see, not just by scrolling through which items are in the cart, but see a shopping cart on display. And so remember, we have access to the cart, so we should be able to just loop over it. It's a collection of products. And so that's what I'm going to implement last here. And so I'm going to implement that in the application controller or application layout here. I'm going to remove my little debug because I don't need that anymore. Okay, so we're relying on this MVP CSS to do the styling. I'm going to rely now on this top area here, this thing here, to allow me to put a shopping cart up at the top right hand corner. But just the way that it works, it requires that I also put an image up here for that thing to get also put over in the corner. So this is an opportunity for me to show you a part of the asset pipeline that we haven't looked at before, which is static images in Rails. And so I'm going to add into this assets folder, app assets images. I'm going to put a file in there. And I guess before I do this, I will quickly make a git commit. I will say git status, git add, git commit, implemented adding and removing from a shopping cart using session. And if you're coding along at home, you can use whatever image you want. I've got an image here that I'm going to drop into place, which is my Stung Eye image. And normally I would resize this. Like, I'm not going to be able to do a variant on this because it's not an active storage image. So normally I would actually resize it to be properly sized, but I'm just going to use the image tag helper to resize it somewhat. So it's not totally a real world situation here, but just allow me to be not so real world for a moment. And I want to pull up the code that I want to work with here. Yes. So I've got that in my app assets images folder. And then over here in the application layout, inside of this header, I'm going to put a nav. And inside of the nav, I'm going to put a link to, and for the link, I'm going to put instead of link text, I'm going to put an image tag. Image tag works with active storage, but if you have images in that app assets images folder, you can just ask them to be loaded up as well. JPG. And here's where I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat on the resizing. I'm going to say image tag, just use HTML attributes to resize this image to 60 pixels, and then go to the root path. So with that in place, if I go back to my look at that, a little icon in the top hand corner, which if I click it, takes me to takes me home. So if I go here, I'm on a particular product page, and if I click here, it now takes me to the home. with that in place, I can now work on putting the cart up on the top hand corner. The way that MVC works is it expects a unordered list to define this menu. And so I am going to make an unordered list. I'm going to have a single item in there called cart. And no, not that, cart. And below that, I'm going to say if the cart is present. And the present helper, when called on a collection, it's going to return true if that collection contains any items, and it's going to return false if that collection contains no items. And so if the cart is empty, if the cart array is empty, present will return false. And then here I'm going to make use of my favorite HTML element of the moment, sup, because I just like saying it. And I'm going to do the cart size. So inside of a nav, which is inside of the header, I've got a unordered list with a single li inside of it. And inside of there, I am optionally including the cart size inside of a sup. And what that does is, look at that. There are 5 items in my cart. If I go and add another item to the cart, there are now 6 items in my cart. And if I add another one, there are 7. Beautiful. And then MVP CSS has this one other nifty thing, is that in this nav, if you nest another unordered list, it'll give you a drop-down menu, which we are going to use to implement the display of all the cart items. So I'm going to put another unordered list inside of here. I know it's getting a little heavily nested. And then I'm going to say, and this is all inside of my if the cart is present. Here I'm going to say cart.eachDo product. So that's what's inside of this cart. And I'm going to output an li for each cart item. So I've got ULLIs inside of a ULLI. And that's usually how these kind of navs go. Like if you've worked with Bulma, if you've worked with Bootstrap, they're usually implemented as ULs nested in, ULLIs nested inside of other ULLIs. That's a very common pattern for building nested menus. And then here I'm going to echo out the product name that's in my cart. And further, I'm going to link to an X emoji, which will go to the cart path for this product and fire off a delete request. And so now I should be able to straight up remove items directly from my cart. So when the cart is present, this is going to give me the ability to hover over my cart, see all the items in my cart, and potentially delete them if I would like. Let me see if I'll come back to this code in a moment, but let me see if I need to debug anything. Make this bigger maybe. Reload the page, hover over here. Look at that. Look at all the items in my shopping cart. I don't want to buy the lightweight bronze suit or shirt anymore. And so I click it and it's gone. The keyboard is gone. The sleek aluminum bench is gone. Everything is being removed from my cart. I have no money. I was just shopping to make myself feel better. And I realized that I don't actually have to check out to make myself feel better. I just needed to work through the act of shopping. And so there you go. That's a little bit of psychology, the psychology of Kyle. And now if I go back, see, no, that little sup's not there anymore. It just says cart. And then, I mean, I could even make cart go away, but that's fine. And then if I click add here, it goes back to 1 and I can hover over it and I can see my items. And there we are. So we're done our implementation here. I am going to paste in one other way to implement the cart, because I realize that all of you likely aren't going to be using mvp.css in your project. You're probably more likely using something like Bulma. But I thought I would go back here just to quickly make sure that you have everything you need for this. And of course, I will post all of this code to GitHub afterwards. So if you have missed anything, you'll be able to get that there. So the very last thing I will show then is I'm going to just copy and paste in some code here, and you know, we are running over time, so if you do need to go, I will not be offended if you just disappear, because we are done the lecture now. The only other thing I wanted to show was another way of displaying the cart, and so I'll show that. I've just put it into the footer as just a place to put it. So if I go down here, oh, I guess I should add a few things. I'll add a few more items to my cart. And then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. So here's another way of displaying the cart. It says cart, and you still says the 4, and it's this little tiny like accordion thing where I click on it and it shows the items, and I click on it again and it hides them. I can still remove items from that cart if I wanted to. And the implementation of this show hide is just regular old HTML. And so I said my favorite HTML element was a sup, but it's actually a details element. I love the details element. I think I showed it before a little bit when maybe when we were working with React, I can't remember. But basically with details, you provide a summary. That's the thing that's always initially visible, and it's a clickable thing. And then everything else that's inside of the details element is either shown or hidden when you click on the summary. So it's baked right into HTML. You don't need any CSS for it. You don't need any JavaScript for it. It just comes for free. You put the clickable thing in the summary, everything else nested in that details. And I'm just doing, you know, inside of the summary, I've got the word cart, and I'm displaying the cart size if the cart has items in it. And then inside the rest of the details, I'm just looping over a list, and I even have it saying no items in cart if there aren't any items present. So if we were to remove all the items from the cart, so if I went up here and I removed each one of them, there should probably be like a remove all button or something like that, but we're out of time. And if I went down here now with no items in the cart and expanded, it just says no items in your cart. So that's the last thing I wanted to show, because that might be more useful for you in your project to have something that was based on this detail summary set of elements, rather than something that relied on the MVP CSS that we were using today. There you go. Thank you very much for coming to class today, everybody, and allowing me to go 11 minutes overtime. I appreciate your patience. And I hope you learned something today. As I mentioned to Travis, I will try to do an implementation of this on my own with React, you know, as part of the mix. I'll probably use Inertia as well, so that I can still keep some of the stuff, right? I should still be able to reuse this logic in the cart controller. Even though React will be sort of on the front end side of things. But as I say, I'll do that on my own. I'll post a video of it. I'll post a video of today's class as well. There already is, as you saw at the beginning of class, a GitHub repo for this project, and the full implementation of the shopping cart is already up on the session cart trial branch. So for any given GitHub repo, you can always click this little button here to see the branches. If you click the session cart trial branch, then if you go in here, you would see the cart controller. It's not as fancy as the one that we made today. Today has a little bit more functionality in it, but the bare bones stuff is already up there inside of a branch.